So we hear all the time, trust the experts, follow the science, believe the science, trust the scientists. We're following the science. That's all well and good. But why is it that there are many people who don't trust the experts, don't trust the scientists? And what can we do about it? That is the subject of this special episode of ScioSophia. We keep hearing many times over, trust the science, follow the science, believe the science. I believe in science. I believe the science. I hate that phrase. But, it's kind of disappointing when we hear that, because there are many people who do not trust scientists and do not trust experts right now, despite many polls saying that the majority of Americans do. But I also then hear many academics, and those of you who are longtime viewers know that I am in academia myself, hear them talk about, lament that people just don't trust the experts anymore, don't trust the experts, and seem to be anti-science or don't follow the science or any number of kind of different things like that. And rather than lamenting it, because I have observed it myself, I decided, you know what, let's find out why. So what follows is the recording of a conversation, discussion, quasi-focus group between myself and many folks who are themselves not in academia. They're not scientists for the most part, who have varied levels of trust in scientists and in experts. And we talked about why that is, and why they don't trust the experts, what they define as an expert, how they define an expert. And also at the end, some good things that they think, as just members of the general public, that that they think we can do to improve the trust in the experts, and in science. And of course, also some fun things in the ending of science. So that's what follows in this video, is about 2-hour conversation between myself and the members of the general public. It was a little bit of a convenient sample, but general public conversation. This is by no means a research kind of thing. It's more so because I've observed that we haven't had a whole lot of people, a whole lot of these kinds of conversations out there on the internet. So I thought it would be a good thing to have to prime the discussion and get folks talking more, not just about the issues with science and academia as the public perceives them, but also what we can do to fix it. Because we all acknowledge the good things that science has done, but right now scientists are not so trusted. So what follows is a unedited conversation, or mostly unedited conversation. And everybody participating of their own free will. They as they said, privately agreed to share their thoughts on camera and have it be on this channel, and and have their reactions, their thoughts on the issues of the day surrounding science and the trust in the experts. And that's going to be what it is. And they, well, for the most part, aren't in academia, as I said, and they're an excellent group of people. I learned a lot from it. I hope you all learn a lot from it. Also, enjoy. Thank you all for coming. This is fantastic. I'm looking forward to hearing your collective thoughts on this topic of the day. So I'm sure a lot of you have your own thoughts, of course, on how much you trust said experts, and the like there. And we're going to get into that, and particularly focusing on the scientists in here. But first I want to just get how many folks went to college or have some college education here. Or in other words, how many of you are not me? You don't have a PhD.
I do not have a PhD.
Yeah, just 4 years.
Just 4 years? Okay. 4 years.
English lit.
English lit. Okay.
I do software now.
I have a PhD.
Okay. But you're not currently working in.
No, I'm retired.
Okay. Yeah, that's the kind of just baseline of what I wanted to get and what kind of range we had there. So before we get started, I'm curious, and anybody can jump in and go first with this. So who do you consider an expert, or an expert in a field, and why do you consider them that? It's kind of really broad question to open things.
You mean sort of what's my criteria?
Yeah, what's your kind of criteria for how you would define an expert?
I guess I would consider somebody who seems to have depth in the field and is open. But the other big criteria for me is open to, as like Karl Popper has, what do you call it? Come on, falsification.
Mhm.
So what I mean by that is that they're open to changing their mind based on the data, not the outcome that they want, or, which is a very hard thing. I think it was Feynman who said something like, it's easy to, you're the easiest person to fool. Yeah, anyway. So,
Okay.
and I think that's, I don't know, just personally, I think that's hard. There are a lot of people that know things, but you have to consider both sides. That's my personal.
Hi, Patrice. We just got started, so you haven't missed much. You're muted.
Sorry about that. I've had a heck of a day.
That's all right. We just got started, and I just asked the opening question of, what do you consider an expert to be, and why do you consider somebody to be an expert?
Oh.
So I think Jim just gave an answer, but does anybody else want to chime in on that, or just?
Yeah, for me, it's like, oh, sorry, Deb, if you want to go for it, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. For me, if I'm in the same field, I have a better sense of who is an expert in my field versus somebody who's in a different field. For example, if I would consider somebody who's an expert in my field, which is psychology, someone who has done a lot of work in the field, is very knowledgeable, will take in different viewpoints and try to see how his or her viewpoint fits with the new information. But for me, it's more difficult saying who is an expert in some other field. That's when I become wondering, is this person an expert or not? Because I just don't really have that same amount of information.
Well, okay, so let me. That's actually a good point in that you have more judgment of who's an expert if you are in that field yourself, or you have some knowledge of that field. Really, so I guess that is a good question. So we've been told so many times that we should trust the experts or trust the scientists or things like that. So how do you identify that someone is an expert or a scientist yourself when they're not someone who's in your own field?
Mm-hmm.
A brain tickler right now.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I can
That's a very good point, because there used to be certain things you could look at, like, articles published, reviewed articles, reference articles for the scientific world, and that will give you some information, but that seems to become less and less reliable. So, creating or being for my field, I agree completely with that. For my field, I can assess it. And even with my customers, I often would say, I'm only an expert because I know just a bit more than you do. And I know what I'm looking for, I know what I need to do, and I'm more experienced in getting what you need because I do it all the time and you don't. It's not a miracle or anything that you're an expert. If you go simpler, like if you look for a plumber or a carpenter or somebody to paint your house, you often use references and people you trust already to do that. But even then, because even then it's like, I used to have a neighbor, she would refer people and I didn't like them, so I don't use her, what she thinks of an expert for my interpretation. So yeah, it's really hard to determine what an expert is, and trusting the expert is just as stupid as follow the science to me.
Oh, and that we agree. Actually, I don't think very much. I despise the phrasing "follow the science" myself as a physical scientist. Stephanie, you want to chime in, or?
Yes. So I believe in the mainstream, the idea of an expert is often backed by the power of an institution. And of course, these are institutions that have been established over, depends on the field, but in a lot of the current things that we think of in terms of experts, like scientists or researchers, we're looking at, have they gone to a particular university? Did they go and get a certification in some fields? Are they licensed by the state? So we have this system in the West where if you want to practice anything relating to psychology and claim that you can treat mental illness, then in order to be an expert in that, you have to take a certain course of education, and then you have to pass certain tests, and then you have to go and get a license from your particular state, and then you have to do certain continuing education classes, supposedly, or usually, not supposedly, to maintain that licensing. And that's supposed to give us some sort of protection against people who might not know what they're doing. This also relates to having some sort of government sanctioning of said experts. So that's kind of a baseline for a lot of fields. Now, I'm in Ayurveda. Ayurveda is the oldest medical system in the world, but to Americans, it's very new. And so we don't have an established establishment with Ayurveda. We have small schools, some of which are better than others, some of which do better training than others. Then we have a whole bunch of people who are practicing at various levels, some of which might have even been self-trained, and some of which might have gone to India, some of which maybe took some online courses. And we don't have any licensing as of yet. Now, there's a move in Ayurveda to license. I am actually not quite in favor of that, because I think that in some respects diminishes our ability to have health freedom. However, the push behind that is people want insurance companies to be able to pay us or pay Ayurveda practitioners. So some of the Ayurveda organizations, which are now establishing the institutions that will determine who is or is not an Ayurveda expert, are now trying to push for this licensing. And so I did go and I passed a board exam. It was a very difficult exam in Ayurveda, and I am now technically a board certified Ayurvedic practitioner. But even with that, the public doesn't necessarily know that in many cases, a board certification is not the same thing as a government license. So you can have a board certification as an orthodontist, but that's not the same thing as your orthodontic or your dental license that you get from the state. The problem that I see is that people can go to school, they can pass a test, and they can, check off all the boxes, and that may or may not mean that they're good at what they do. And then there are the people who might do all of that and be particularly good at the politics. So those are the ones that go and get into the positions of power, and they're busy doing administrative things or the things that the people in power do, but they're not necessarily on the ground level working one-on-one. For example, in medicine, they're not working one-on-one with patients, but they're up at the top making the decision. And unfortunately, right now, we have this case where we have people at the top who have all of the degrees, they have all of the credentials, maybe they went to Yale or Harvard or whatever, so it all looks and sounds very impressive, and maybe they're very talented at navigating the politics. They're good at schmoozing, they're good at getting into the position they want to get into and getting all of the people behind them that they need to do. They're kind of like little, I hate to say this, sometimes medicinal warlords, like they can go and put themselves into positions of power. And then even though they're not actively treating patients, they're the ones that are making our health policy, which can be hugely problematic, never mind the issue of were they paid to be put in those positions by for-profit companies that might have a vested interest in having their drug pushed versus another drug. And all of that is discussed very in detail in Brett Weinstein's Dark Horse podcast about regulatory capture. So this is a problem I think we have right now, is that the people who are at the top are probably very talented at politics, but they might not be very talented at healing people.
Okay. And we're going to get into some of the medical side soon. So I don't want to dwell on it too much right now. And just this is sort of overall kind of questions of what you think an expert is and how they're defined. And so that's good. That's valid experience. I'm not trying to discount that. I'm just trying to keep it a little high level right now instead of down in the weeds. So Brooke or Patrice, do you want to add any thoughts to it, or?
I think for me, I do like going to medical journals and stuff to see who I think has good information. I mean, I don't have a ton of education. I didn't go through college. So there's only so much good I figure that can do me. I mean, I have to rely on what I've seen a person do myself, or like information from other people who I trust. And I have to be really careful. I mean, I don't just look at someone who has any kind of a degree and automatically think that they deserve the title of expert. I do think that if you practice something, or if you have a career for long enough, then if you're actually doing that thing, you probably are pretty expert about it. However, I don't necessarily conflate that with you're good at it.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, there is a difference there. Who is the expert versus who's actually good at doing something.
you might be expertly bad at it.
It's distinctly possible. I don't know, Brooke, up to you if you want to add anything. Or
I generally look at experts as somebody who has a long resume of varied things. And that, at least in my field, seems to make you more of an expert if you've got a variety of things. I don't know how much that actually translates into the scientific field, because you guys tend to be very, very focused on one thing. I know that TV has a tendency of showing you one side of something, so it's really hard to get past the editing and what they want you to see. So it's if you can read what they've written, it seems to be more reliable on making your judgment on whether they are an expert. But when you get it into the TV world, it's a whole different deal, whether they're making themselves look like an expert even if they're not.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. And that kind of leads into a vein of a question that I was thinking of. We've seen the portrayal of people as being experts, and perhaps more so than they are. We've seen the consistent focus on trust the experts, or trust the scientists, or follow the science, the hated phrase of mine. I'm not gonna lie, I hate that phrase myself. So do you all think that as just like general public, people should rely more or less on different experts like Fauci or climate scientists or any number of different things? That I'm thinking particularly outside of your own field. Should we rely more on the experts to help guide policy and decision making, or should we not? I'm asking a lot of brain tickler questions today, I'm noticing.
So there's a couple of things there. I'm going to Nassim Taleb. Now, what's his principle on this? He talks. The problem is, let's say you have some administrative official make some blanket decision on something that affects everybody. Not that we'd ever have that. Oh no. If they're wrong, that means hundreds of millions of people have now done the wrong thing. But if you put the information out there and let individuals make it, then you're going to have more people that are potentially right. Yes. Are you going to have some that are wrong? Yes, but they have skin in the game. The political person making the decision has a different skin in the game. They don't have skin in the game if they fail. It's a different thing. So I think the knowledge should be out there, maybe a recommendation, but as a mandate or a law or something, I think we have to be very careful. Just that's personal. And I agree on the whole regulatory capture thing that you talked about, Brett. That's I was going to mention that, but the other thing is that we're talking about is two things. One is certification. There's a certification issue. For example, in Oregon, we just passed the governor just signed a bill eliminating all requirements for graduating high school for the next 5 years. Well, that's going to be a certification problem, because what business is going to take that as meaning anything? At least if you graduate this year or over the next 5 years. There's a thing called transaction costs. I don't mean the actual cost in terms of dollars. That's part of it, but that's like you go to Amazon and you can see what the ratings are and how many people rated that. In a way, that's helping you with transaction cost, because now you have more of an idea you're going to get a good product. Or if it'd be nice to have that with experts to know, have people rated these decisions well. And anyway, that's just it's just an idea.
Okay. Did anybody want to build off that, or?
Yeah, I think there, for me, it does seem like there is more credit I would give to them, and even making policies. I mean, yeah, you have to get down to the motivation and the consequences they're going to face for what they do. That's the biggest thing for me. Like if someone's going to lose their job, it's going to be more important for them to be accurate or do their best or whatever. And if they're out in the public eye, that's probably good, or at least if their peers are looking at that, that's good. If you have someone whose sole purpose is to either continue their power, whatever power they have for decision making, that's the only reason they're doing something, that's not going to be very credible in my mind.
Okay. Stephanie, you popped up on my screen, so I presume you have some thoughts.
Yes. So when the United States was created, they put into this governmental structure some checks and balances. And sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. But the idea behind checks and balances is that it would hopefully reduce the possibility of tyranny. So the problem with an expertopia, as I might call it, where we just have a couple of experts at the top who can't be questioned and can't, you can't veer from their opinion of things and their narrative, and actually become censored if you veer from that narrative. That is a problem because we now don't have checks and balances. We have one-sided decision-making and information that's being provided where the people who are questioning it, and some of the questions might be good and some of the questions might be darn stupid. But we're supposed to be living in a pluralistic democracy or republic or whatever you want to call it, where we don't want to live in a tyranny, or at least some of us don't, where we want to have an ability for not just top-down rule, but a bottom-up approach to living. And that's different from what had been done for millennia before the United States was created. And unfortunately, right now, I think because of all the fear that people have, they're willing to give away not only their power, but our free speech in order to feel safe. And the safety can't be guaranteed.
Right.
So we need checks and balances with our experts. And we don't have that. Those types of structures really need to be set up so that we can intelligently have conversations about, for example, public health policy, which is really one of the biggest issues right now. We can't have those conversations. If we say certain things, we could be censored or silenced. And that is authoritarian and it's totalitarian. And it doesn't inspire more confidence in experts. It inspires fear at best. So the problem is that because of the way that we have such a powerful media right now, we have 6 major corporations, I know it's around 6, that run all of the major media outlets in the United States, and possibly this probably relates to Canada and other countries, very similar things. So we have a bunch of a small number of large companies running the technology infrastructure, Google, Facebook, etc., that are in control of what people are seeing. They can filter out things they don't like. They don't have to actively censor. So they can determine what we can and cannot learn about. And this removes the ability of the average person to be able to really understand all the nuances of what's going on.
Sure. So
we're in a really big danger zone here. And what happens is that the media and big tech will determine who out of the credentialed experts actually are put forth as the real experts. And they will instantly go and discredit anybody who has similar credentials and say, oh, those people, they don't really have those credentials, or they're quacks, or they're this or they're that. They'll just go after them and destroy them with their, they'll go after their reputation, basically.
Yeah.
And so the average person will only listen to the expert who is being backed by the media and big tech and the corporations, or whatever you want to call it, corporate industrial complex. and government complex too. And they will ignore the other experts who might actually have better credentials, or maybe they have more experience working directly with patients, but because they're not the approved experts, they get ignored, ridiculed, censored, silenced. This is a very scary time in the West. It's probably one of the most dangerous times
I see you, Deb.
ever.
Okay.
So I will stop there.
That's okay. I just want to piggyback on what Stephanie said. I haven't been in academia since the late 1970s, early 80s. And one of the reasons I got out of it is because if people were coming up with research, having findings that did not fit the current narrative, you didn't get published. And that happened to a lot of people I knew who at the time, there were supposedly no gender differences between males and females, especially in terms of, say, problem solving and wayfinding, which was my specialty. When differences came up, we were told to rewrite our articles so that wouldn't be present, or you just didn't get published. So the pattern for always following the narrative has been there for an awfully long time. So it's not new. It's actually pretty old.
Yeah, and I was going to say there's two different things I can see going on here. Yeah, there should be checks and balances on the experts, yes, but there's also the issue of what the media portrays of the experts, and then those are two different things, but one can end up influencing the other in terms of the trust that you have in an expert. You want to say something, Jim?
Yeah, so I agree. The plus, I mean, you're seeing. Plus, if you want the major media, if you got a 3-minute segment on there, that's a huge amount of time that's costing them a lot of money. And so they'll have a 3-minute segment with some other person on, quote, the other side, and all you hear is two people yelling at each other. You don't actually you don't get into any I don't even listen to it because I don't care if I agree with it or not. It's not useful. I'm not getting any information. Sure. I'm just hearing insults being thrown around. Whereas long form podcasts, I'll listen to that because I may disagree with them, but I get to hear all of the reasons why they think something. Now, part of the problem is, of course, as other people pointed out, is I don't subscribe to a lot of podcasts just because I don't have time. I mean, there's some really excellent ones out there. I just don't have time.
Yeah, nobody has the time to listen to all of them.
Yeah, right. And so there's kind of a filtering process that has to take place, and that's, I think, at least to me, the mainstream media have lost. I don't care whether it's CNN or Fox or whatever. I don't trust any of them. I mean, beyond certainly not in the science area at all.
Okay, so there's two different things I'm getting out of here. Is like trusting the media to portray the science correctly and trusting the scientists themselves are two different things, but probably one very strongly affects the other. Was that something that kind of like everybody would agree with, that some of your trust in the scientists right now is affected by what you see in the media?
Yeah,
I think you kind of have your hand half raised, Marcella. That was
yeah, sorry. little raise. Yeah, I think it's the media, but it's also, for me, it's hard anyway, because I came from Europe and the Netherlands. So when I came to the States, I agree. It's like, I just didn't understand that they had like conversations and it was 3 minutes of yelling, which you indeed get nothing from. Whereas in the Netherlands, when they have a conversation, they actually listen to each other and, go back and forth. So the media makes it really hard, which then puts the burden on you to go find the podcast, the information, and the people you trust. I think with the current scenario, or especially last year, if I hear the so-called experts from the government or the professional associations or whatever, all of a sudden say something that goes against decades, if not longer, of scientific proven knowledge or information, and then I'm like, why, where did that come from? And I remember like the pediatricians, for example, they were based on the data, and since I followed it both in the Netherlands and here, based on the data, it was very clear that children were not as affected, they were not spreading it. They were the virus, because they get colds and flus all the time, but this virus is not impacting children, and the data was clear on that. So in the Netherlands, children just went to school, they didn't need masks, they didn't need anything. And initially, the American Pediatric Association came out with the same information and the same advice. But all of a sudden, they switched around. Now, if you follow the conspiracy theorists, they say, well, the CDC just put some pressure on them, or whoever, they get funding from the federal government. So it was not the narrative. And that's where you really start distrusting your experts, because they are willing to go against what is supposed to be scientific, just because it's not the narrative. And that's where you start losing it all. And Fauci did the same thing. I don't mind that he didn't know not all the answers. I didn't even mind that he in the beginning changed his answers. But when it gets worse and worse and less logical or even scientific,
Yeah.
or I should say the other way, scientific or even logical, then it becomes like, I lose complete trust and belief in this person.
Yeah. So that actually leads handily in sort of a really quick hit kind of question I had in mind, because there's a lot of our scientists who are like Fauci. They're in different federal agencies and what have you. And so my question is, knowing everything now and where you're at now with after pandemic and all that, and not just thinking of Fauci, thinking of all the scientists that exist in federal agencies, what is the first word that comes to your mind thinking of them?
Desperate.
Desperate?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not good at research.
Ignore them.
Desperate, not good at research. What was that, Jim?
No accountability.
Right. Ignore them. I don't trust them at all.
So Brooke, do you want to?
That pretty much what everybody's already said.
Okay, so Stephanie, I don't know if you want to jump in and add something, but that was one of my thoughts. Is like your first word that comes to mind when you're thinking of federal scientists.
Yeah, I didn't want to jump in because I felt like I needed to process why this popped into my mind. The word that came to my mind was fake. And then I was like, well, what exactly does my subconscious mind mean by that? Do I mean that they're fake scientists? I don't think that they're fake scientists per se, but that they aren't being authentic and genuine. And there's certain things that we can't talk about on YouTube, but there's a disconnect between some of the data and what they're actually saying. So could that be malicious? Could it be from stupidity? Could it be from naivete? Could it be all of the above? I don't want to presume in terms of every single person who's involved in these things that are coming out, but they have, one of the big problems that we have right now is that they don't seem to care that they are not reaching a lot of people. And they go and they double down rather than going, gee, why aren't we reaching you? Could we do a better job? And so they end up demonizing and dehumanizing the people who are kind of skeptical of them, and treating people like myself or other people on this call, or maybe people watching this, like we're idiots and we're morons, which doesn't do much to inspire more confidence. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So
definitely.
I'm going to be going off on a tangent here, but this also, and on the flip side of it, then there's a demographic, and I don't want to make this about politics, so try not to be too political here, because I'm really nonpartisan. There's a tendency amongst certain people to just say, I'm pro-science and I don't want to be anti-science. And then they lump people who are maybe skeptical of certain narratives as being anti-science. I'm not anti-science. I'm anti-bad science. I'm anti-regulatory capture, meaning regulatory capture is a fancy way of saying bought and paid for. I'm against science that's bought and paid for by corporate interests who have profits over people in their minds. And I feel like that's something that most people can agree on, but there seems to be, I don't know if it's a willful blindness or a naivete among a lot of people where they're so desperate to be seen as being pro-science that they don't want to admit that maybe some of the companies that are pushing our science are pushing their science because they want stockholder profits, not because they care about people. And if we could maybe try to bridge this gap and not make it science versus anti-science, I don't know, that might help, but I don't know how to articulate that properly.
Yeah, and we're going to get into that. Some of my questions closer to the end are more so on the how can we improve trust kind of thing. Yeah, Patrice, go ahead.
Marcella, she was gonna talk.
Oh, I'm sorry, Marcella.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think with it's not the one word answer you were looking for, but I'm reading this book from Thomas Sowell that's Intellectuals and Society. And in his definition, it's like people that generate ideas and things. They do not necessarily like, create a product, except the product is an idea. And what he said is like the problem with that is that they, if you are an engineer and you build a bridge, there is external checks if you build the right bridge, and you can only do that one time wrong and you're gone. And hopefully, they check that.
You do it one time wrong and the bridge collapses.
Right.
Yeah, with the intellectuals where it's purely ideas, the only validation is internal. And if you are in an echo chamber, and the federal government would be one of those echo chambers, you don't even think that you can be wrong because everybody agrees with you. So everybody outside must just be stupid. And what he describes, and what I thought very interesting, is it's like they don't even think that they need arguments to convince you, because they are just the learned people and the elite, and they know what is good. And that's not new. Apparently, that's you can see that throughout the centuries, but definitely as long as the U.S. exists. But that's what I really see. That it's like what Stephanie was saying is they don't even think they have to explain it, because don't you know that they are the people that know what they're talking about?
Right. Okay.
So I wanted to explain my answer a little bit.
Sure.
Desperate. Because I think with a pandemic, you're going to get a lot of stress in the way of we need to make the right decisions, right? And there was just information in the beginning we didn't have any clue about. And it seemed clear to me that there was a bit of flailing, but there was no room for that given in the media, in people's expectations. There's no room for flailing. There was no room for mistakes or changing course. And I think a lot of that does have to do with politicians wanting to act like they had all the information and that they knew what was going on and knew what they needed to do about it. And they wanted people to feel safe. From the beginning, it seemed clear to me that they were desperate about masks. How could they tell everyone, yes, you need a mask, go and get it? There are none. And I think you see it coming down the line, desperation after desperation to get people what they feel they need to feel safe. And their whole career, their whole reputation is based on this. It's really not fair. I mean, this is a pretty unique situation. And I honestly don't think we should have expected as much, and we wouldn't be fighting if we didn't. We'd just be maybe more focused on what we needed to do that made sense to move forward.
Oh, okay. So a lot of scientists are federal scientists, but we also rely a lot. The Fed also relies a lot on work that's done through federal grants by university professors and their students. So do you have the same thought and word that comes to mind when you think of the scientists who are university professors, or is it different?
Different, yeah.
Different? Okay. So what kind of word would you have in mind for the university professors who are scientists, who do research and are sometimes out there in the public, and more and more so I see them often on Twitter now?
Well, I think the ones that are federal are trying, in a lot of ways, trying to appease whoever their boss is. And so now the ones that in universities, et cetera, my concern with them is, are they again, as Deb pointed out, are they again trying to just fit the narrative? They really should be trying to disprove the narrative, because if they can't disprove it, that supports it. But if they can, then that's, I mean, either way, that's good science.
Mhm.
You know, I'm not saying disprove the narrative because I don't like the narrative. That's not my point. But they need to do real science where they, you know, if they come up with a hypothesis, they also need to come up with how can I prove that hypothesis wrong? Because if you don't do that, then you're not doing real science, and that's my concern. And I think we started losing some of that. So
Yeah, go for it, Deb.
Okay. And one thing about that, though, is journals do not want to publish negative results. So say somebody's trying to support somebody else, replicate somebody else's work, and they can't. That piece of work that doesn't replicate, it doesn't see the light of day usually. But another thing I wanted to point out is after I was in academics, I was a government contractor. So I had, the government scientists watching over my shoulders, and from my perspective, they were basically bureaucrats. They were told what they needed to be finding and what they wanted their contractors to be doing. And so that's why I said they really weren't doing science unless they were, say, a scientist in one of the government science labs.
Right.
But the ones who are overseeing contracts and grants, they're really bureaucrats. They're making sure our timesheets are done correctly and stuff like that.
Do have a lot of that. I particularly over here, Brooke and Patrice and Marcella. Do you have any thoughts you want to add on that? And it can be easily as if your one word is different for describing university professors as opposed to federal scientists. I would love to know what that one word is.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I don't think mine is different. I don't think I trust right now. And I want to make a distinction between hard and soft science. Maybe I'll trust the hard science a bit more because it's hopefully still based on data, experiment, verification. But when we go into the territories of the humanities and the philosophy and things that is already hard to call science anyway, I don't think there's anything else. It's still an internal echo chamber, and they review each other and they like each other and they cheer each other on. And I don't think there's any solid counter argument. Not even to necessarily because I don't like your argument, but just to try to disprove it, which is basically what you have to do in science. Try to disprove and make sure that whatever you have as your latest theory is still valid. And I don't see that at all in that section. I hope it's a little bit more, but again, the bigger and the more well-known the universities, I would be more and more skeptical.
Okay, Brooke, I saw you trying to jump in.
When it comes to a university scientist, it's more of a mixed bag for me, because when you get into people who teach, half of them really have good intentions and want to pass things on to the next generation. And then you have others who have aspirations to move on and make their name known to everyone outside the university bubble. But it's a very strange little, it really is, it's just a bubble. Because I remember being in college and feeling like I had lived in a bubble outside of the real world, and then you leave university life and you kind of have to relearn some of the things. Like a lot of current events that happened while I was in college, I barely noticed because it was just not part of my life in any way. And then you go, oh, that happened while I was in college, and it doesn't really seem like it happened when I was alive.
Okay,
That's
interesting.
So that plays perfectly with what I was going to say. The first thing that came to my mind was disconnected. It seems like they're insulated. They follow this path that takes them completely out of like a normal sort of just career in a public sector. I don't know what you want to call it, but they've got these stringent requirements, which I think is good if you have the testing for it being different. Like Marcella was saying, like you need to try and prove them wrong, but that doesn't seem to be a focus, like to me anyway. I mean, I'm not all up in it, but
right.
if you're in this world where you're trying to get validation for what you're doing to get more money, more prestige, or whatever, then you've lost the benefits of being wrong.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. So I'm guessing there might be some varying levels of how many people here actually trust scientists to do to do their job at this point, just from what I'm hearing. And it's interesting here because actually there's a number of different polls and things like Pew Research and what have you have said that the majority of Americans actually do trust scientists writ large. Now, the fun problem with this is that they never say trust them to do what. Here, so we're going to get a little more nuanced with that because that annoys me. So I have a couple of those kinds of questions. Do you want to say something, Jim, first before we go, or do?
Yeah, just say the thing that kind of demarcates me is something like physics or chemistry. I can listen to like Don Lincoln from Fermilab, or the people at the what's her name, Sabine Hostetter, I think is her name. Anyway, and I trust, I can look up that information and confirm it and so forth. But you look at the Sokal squared type situation, and it's like that's a total trash heap. I mean, I can't trust anything that comes out of that. So anyway, out of that area.
Okay.
That's the soft sciences.
Well, and yeah, and there is variations on that, so you can feel free to say more so what you think of your level of trust for certain things when it comes to particular types of sciences. I'm fine with you elaborating on that if you'd like. And that's one of the ones I wanted to ask is like scientists, regardless of where they work, do you trust them to provide you with accurate information and knowledge, or do you not? On a particular thing, be it anything from climate science, which is admittedly my field, to the pandemic.
I guess I would
on face value.
Yeah.
Not if they what?
Not just because they're scientists, especially in the more difficult, more politicized areas. I think it would be nowadays for me more difficult to just trust that the scientist just because he is a scientist. And I personally cannot go back to every study or have access to every study. But I remember that you had one, Adrian, not too long ago where the conclusion of the study was absolutely different than what actually the result of the study was. And so, no, I don't trust them just on face value.
I think that was the one about people speaking English being more likely to spread coronavirus. That was the one where the study actually said the opposite, but they said in the conclusions that, yeah, if you have more aspirated consonants in your language, you're more likely to spread a respiratory disease. Anyway, Stephanie, you want to chime in?
This just goes back to which experts, which scientists, and we have a filter, and the filter is the media and now big tech. So they get to pick and choose which scientists are now put up on the pedestal and which ones are thrown down the garbage chute. So I would look at which scientist before I'd be able to say whether I trust that particular scientist or not. Now, in the journals, they're supposed to report any potential conflicts of interest, and hopefully that's done accurately and with integrity. But even when people are doing science without any sort of direct financial compensation, we have a problem in that a whole bunch of studies can't get funded because they aren't related to creating profit-making medicines or whatever. And there's a whole bunch of things that aren't that we are not getting enough different opinions on and enough data on to really have an accurate scientific picture. So what happens is we'll have like one study comes out and, oh, this means this. Well, if we were really going to be scientific about it, wouldn't we do a bunch of different studies, and we would maybe have different people and using different methodologies? And some of that's just not feasible. But just because something's put in a peer-reviewed publication that is generally respectable doesn't mean that it's true. And really the big example of this was last year when they published that article in Nature claiming there was no possible way that the COVID-19 SARS-CoV-2 was man-made or involved in any sort of bioengineering. And then, sorry, my bad. Maybe there is some potential evidence in the gene sequencing that can show that there was some other things going on possibly there. And there's still no mainstream consensus on that. But I've certainly seen scientists that aren't being promoted by mainstream journalists who have given plenty of good reasons as to why it's not just something that happened naturally. Not to get into all the weeds of that, but this just goes back to the media filter that we have a big problem with. And I'm a freelance writer and I've done editing. I've worked for publications. I haven't done a ton of writing for big magazines in recent years, in part because it's like in order for me to write for them, I'd have to write certain things that maybe I wouldn't want to write. But I have looked at enough of writing and I've also been interviewed. I've been quoted in newspapers, and I've had, when I was younger, I had people do little, articles about me in magazines because I was like one of the first women on the internet. It's a big long thing I don't want to get into. But what I found when they were interviewing me is that I would tell them something, and then they would go and they'd publish something else. And this was benign stuff. This was just nicey nice. Oh, I think, we need to get more women on the internet, blah, 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 blah. And I would then open up the newspaper and see what they quoted me as saying, and I would be shocked. And then the other hilarious thing was that I was actually featured in the Los Angeles Times when I was, I think, about 26 or 27. And they were like saying that I was like this hugely successful entrepreneur in the .com space. They put my picture in a paper and had me I was a Gen X success story. And it was like, I was broke. I wasn't doing that well, but they just, I had some traffic to my website and I was just easy for them to talk to. And I wasn't trying to lie to them or anything. It's just that they took my story and they really made it into something that it was not. So because I've experienced that firsthand, I'll never trust the media because they lied about me and I was even trying to get them to lie.
But there's a difference between trusting the media and trusting the scientists that the media is talking about. And that's the question that I was asking, is more so about the scientists, not the media.
Yeah, see, but to me right now, there's no difference because it's only certain scientists that we're told are trustworthy. And all the other ones are the ones that aren't. You see what I'm saying? So there's a filter. And I wouldn't even know necessarily who the scientists are who aren't, other than some of the ones that are on our alternative media, but there might be scientists out there that have some amazing theories that they're not getting any attention at all because they're the ones who are just diligently working and they don't want to deal with all the hoo-ha. So to me, the media filter is one of the big problems with science right now. And because so many people who really don't understand science, I mean, some of them do, but there's quite a few people, they don't understand science. So they just hear science and then they see the media pushing a certain narrative and saying, this is the science. They follow that because they want to be, look, I'm cool, I'm following the science, which is that phrase that you don't like. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, no, I think it does. Go ahead, Marcella.
Yeah, I think with science, although it seems, it's supposed to be in its own thing, science has the same that any company would have, right? There are certain subjects and certain opinions that are not popular. So if they're not popular, they're not going to be published as much because even a journal wants to be, they want to attract people that actually read those articles. And so they are going for that, what they think is either sexy or interesting or whatever. And that is also in a certain narrative. And in your field, for example, I mean, which people come out that are not following the climate crisis model? And if they come out against it, then you're completely vilified. So we don't get exposure a whole lot to people like you who might have a more moderate thing, or even if the scientist that is in the article or the scientist that is being published, he might have a moderate or she might have a moderate opinion, but that's not sexy. You know, we cannot say that our estimates are 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, because it's much more interesting to go that far outlier model that has 5 degrees, because that is sexy. We're going to flood all and we're going to die all and all that stuff. So science, unfortunately, also has a little marketing problem.
Yeah, Patrice?
The way I think about it is not necessarily do I trust the science or do I trust scientists? Do I trust this scientist? That's not even my question. My question is, on a sliding scale, how much do I trust this person? And have they shown to be trustworthy in this case or this case? How much have they been right or wrong? How much have they been willing to give up for their opinion, or their research or their findings? It's really hard for me anyway to try and figure out how trustworthy some person is or isn't.
Well, and that's kind of why I was asking the sort of specific thing, because things like Pew and what have you are just really generic and saying, do you trust the scientists? But what I was asking more so is specifically, do you trust a scientist to give you accurate information? In this particular example, there's a couple of other different layers that I want to ask, but like another one is, do you trust that different scientists are actually acting in the public interest when they're doing their research, or do you think they're in it for themselves? Those kinds of questions, and it's totally fine. You're not going to offend me as the active career scientist in the group. You're not going to offend me with whatever you say. So don't worry about that. And I'm really curious to hear it, because I want to be able to go back to my colleagues and say, we got there are people who think this for very different reasons. And, we got to work this through, because at least for me, I know, I'm going to be on my soapbox for a second. I know science to me is really important in terms of crafting policy and for the betterment of society and what have you. So if we don't have a public that generally is willing to work with us and trust us, even if we don't, particularly hopefully with the accountability, I would agree with you, Marcel. It's just like, I would love to see a huge amount more accountability applied to my field and to others. But it's important to have that trust, because otherwise, whatever policy is then crafted off of the scientific research that proposes, like, this might be the solution to a problem in particular, or things with the pandemic, well, then if there's no trust there, of course, then it gets really, really hairy. So that's why I'm asking more about the scientists specifically than the idiot policymakers or the media.
It's interesting. It was on Netflix on the, you remember that black hole picture they came out with?
Yes.
So it was all about that. And the way they did it, they got all this data, and they had 3 teams that did not talk to each other, use the same data, and then like months later come together and present what they each found, to see how much correlation there was between the 3 teams, to see, anyway. So I thought that was like a perfect example of great use of science. I mean, how to do it. But do I think I don't know. I mean, I did a dive with a researcher program on Little Cayman Islands, where you actually dive with a scientific researcher. You're basically their dive buddy for a week. And my impression was, yes, they had biases and so forth, but they generally were curious about the thing. I don't think you can do this as a living and not be curious. I mean, it requires, I don't know. I mean, I don't have a PhD, but it requires a lot of study, a lot of jumping through hoops, et cetera. So maybe once you get in the federal government, it changes. But I do think they generally have curiosity, and maybe they can sharpen their skills a bit in being skeptical of their own echo chamber. But I don't think they're trying to. I don't think they're malicious or anything.
You don't think they're malicious. You think they might just get stuck in a little bit of groupthink.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Would that be something okay, Deb, go ahead.
Well, from my perspective, I think researchers in, say, a university setting have a very fine line they have to walk, because most of them are getting their funding from the federal government. So if, say, they are in a field that becomes sort of out of favor, for example, your discipline of climatology, the funding goes away. And then you're kind of scrambling. You want to answer your questions, but it's hard to do so without the money. And my daughter's a graduate student in meteorology. And her department didn't lose funding when the climatology group did, because her group was not doing anything controversial. So they were able to keep their funding.
I see.
So the thing is, as a researcher in a university setting, if you're not asking the questions that are popular right now, they can be very difficult, even though they're the questions you want to be asking.
And I think we need to, the more we see the process of how they got their answers, that definitely more credible.
Brooke, you want to add anything? I'm trying to make sure everybody gets an opportunity to talk. So
I'm not sure I have anything to add to this specific.
Okay. Let me ask a sort of roundabout question then, because I'm kind of curious. And as you think of your answer for this, exclude me, because I know all of you know me to some degree via social media and other things. Most of you don't work in science, or you did and you've retired. What is your perception of what scientists think of you? Sort of layperson public. What do you think scientists in academia and federal scientists think of you out there who don't do this for a living?
I have an answer.
Go for it, Steph.
I think in general, they look down on the average person. And I know with what I do, because I do all this woo-woo stuff like Ayurveda, they definitely look down on, not all of them, but quite a few of them would look down on me and think that I'm involved in a bunch of fairy tale nonsense. And it's that arrogance that kind of permeates the field, at least from my perception, which I could be wrong. I'm sure there are humble scientists, so my apologies to any humble scientists out there who are open-minded and who are watching this. But in general, I feel that science in some ways it's gotten, I don't want to say too big for its britches, but it believes its own hype and really needs to, it's like you almost get so focused in the weeds and that you don't step back and realize that we really don't know much at all. I mean, we definitely have amazing technology now, but we don't know jack. We don't know why we're here. We don't really know how things work. We're kind of like the kids playing around with the Tinker Toys, and we're kind of assuming that we have control over things when we really don't. And I think if science had a bit more humility, it would probably be better for everybody. And I'll just shut up there because I could go on.
No, and that's a good point. And that's what I wanted to see. What I wanted to hear about was your perception of what scientists think of you, regardless of what is actually true, because that's what they need to know, is what do actually people think of that. What I can't talk. What is your perception of what scientists think of you?
Yeah, I think they think we're ignorant. And yes, okay, so I'm ignorant of I may be ignorant of a variety of things, but if you can't explain it to me in at least terms that a high school student would understand, then you don't know very much about your science. I think it was Feynman who basically said, if we can't explain it, so we don't understand it. So anyway.
It was my
and I don't mean a quick sound bite. I mean, sit down for half an hour, whatever, and be able to sit down and do it.
I saw a lot of nodding heads with Stephanie's comment, but please, if any of you want to elaborate on your thoughts on that, go for it.
I think I also want to kind of like split that one into, okay, soft sciences, the humanities, the philosophy. I think that there I really feel that like we are the thinkers. We have thought this all through. We have all our theories, and we don't have to explain that. if you don't, I feel it there more. But I must say, I'm involved with like an academic hospital and a cancer research center. And I must say the researchers there often come to like presentations. They really try to explain what they're working on, what their new technology is, what they're trying to do. And they really try to explain things and seem to enjoy that. So there are definitely scientists that want to make that step and want to make it more approachable and acceptable. And I think that's a little bit of a change to, like, it used to be the doctor knows everything, so don't ask questions, just follow the directions. And the new line of those kind of scientists are really like more like, yeah, you have to, if you are interested, we're happy to help you explain the process. So there's definitely probably personality in scientists that would help there as well. So I find a lot of people that have the data or something to back them up, they are willing to explain and put a little bit more effort for them.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I think it feels like I'm dismissed. Like there probably is some basic level, right, where there's a big knowledge gap. And so I get that and I can accept that, but that shouldn't be a barrier for us communicating with each other. And it shouldn't be something where you dismiss someone or dismiss their opinions. Like, you can talk with them about it, try and convince them or explain something, but the dismissal, I think, is a big disconnect between the two.
Dismissing your concerns is what you mean, just to clarify.
Or questions or doubts. And I think if I bring up doubts, that's the biggest time when it will just be dismiss your doubts, because I don't know if there's if it's just because in order to advance in the sciences, there is that base level you have to accept and get on board with. But if me as a layperson is not on board with that or has questions about it, then the conversation might not get very far.
Mm-hmm. I saw a few folks nodding at the dismissal, the desire for more humility, the things like that, and basically think that you're looked down on if you're not doing this kind of thing. Interesting. Okay, I was suspecting that might be the answer, but I'm glad to hear it. So, would it be?
Sorry, I just want to add quickly and say I think it's sometimes also the willingness to say I don't know or we don't know yet how that works. If a scientist does that gives a lot of leeway for me to start trusting him more, because the person knows where the limits are of the knowledge. But very often it's presented.
Marcella, your audio just cut. Uh-oh. I can't hear you. Oh no.
Dang, that was really good.
That was really good what you were saying.
Yeah.
Oh no. Oh, I have to dial back in. Okay, well, we'll wait for you for a second here. That does happen. I'm sorry.
I should put my chat up.
Yeah, I saw it in the chat, but let's see here. So okay. We're gonna start playing some clips here, and I'll be curious because one thing that came up, and I went to go find it while y'all were talking, is there's the filter of the media, but then there's also scientists who have gotten more enterprising and started doing their own thing to actually reach out to the public themselves. One of them is a scientist. I actually know her, full disclosure, I know her professionally pretty well. I don't know her personally, but is Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, who is a very established expert in climate science and expert communicator. Now it works for the Nature Conservancy, but in prior work was director of the Climate Science Center at Texas Tech University. And so that was her particular field there, but she started a YouTube series in conjunction with PBS. So she didn't do it alone, but in conjunction with PBS, called Global Weirding. And I want to play a clip of that and see if for you guys, if having this kind of an interaction with a scientist is a meaningful way rather than having the filter of the media. So let me pull that up. Share sound, optimize for video. And you can find this on YouTube. It is a video series called Global Weirding.
Global warming, climate change, whatever people are calling it these days, it hasn't been around for that long, right? Well, actually, a fascinating international cast of characters has been studying our planet's climate for almost 200 years. It started back in the 1820s with this smart French mathematician called Joseph Fourier. He figured out that, according to basic physics, our planet should be a lot colder than it is now, about 60 degrees Fahrenheit or more than 30 degrees Celsius colder. So why isn't it? Some 30 years later, a smart American woman gave him the answer. In the 1850s, Eunice Foote ran experiments to show that our planet has a natural blanket built into the atmosphere. This blanket is made up of heat-trapping gases like carbon dioxide and methane and water vapor. The sun shines down and a great deal of its energy goes right through that invisible blanket. The sun's energy hits the earth and the earth heats up and gives off heat energy. But guess what? Just like a blanket traps our body heat on a cold night, this natural blanket traps the Earth's heat, keeping us, again, almost 60 degrees warmer than we would be otherwise. If it weren't for this amazing natural blanket, our planet would be a frozen ball of ice. Brr. But it didn't take too long for our next science hero, an impressively bearded Irish physicist named John Tindall, to grasp the stunning implications of Eunice's work. Human activities can affect the thickness of this blanket. Specifically, by digging coal and oil and natural gas out of the ground and burning it, we are pumping massive extra amounts of carbon into the atmosphere. Carbon that would otherwise stay buried in the ground for millions of years. And what does a thicker blanket do? Well, of course, it traps more heat. How much more? In the 1890s, a mustachioed Swedish scientist named Svante Arrhenius calculated how much the Earth would warm if we doubled or tripled the thickness of the extra carbon blanket in the atmosphere. His numbers were amazingly similar to what we get from our biggest, most modern supercomputers today. But he did it using a pen and paper 120 years ago.
So I'm not going to go through all of it because some of her clips are a bit long, but what would you think of having that kind of level of interaction with a scientist? Because she is a very established climate scientist, actually, herself, and one of the most renowned in my field, actually. But that is her own series, and that's one of many. There's actually like 40 videos in that playlist. So if you really want to go watch it, go enjoy it. But things like that are what she puts out, and what other scientists have started doing is being more trying to connect more and get through the filter of the media.
Right. So in that, it was interesting, except there's a bunch of assumptions she's kind of putting out there and getting you to assume are true, which, but shouldn't say they are or aren't, but anyway, so it doesn't mention any other causes of carbon dioxide or similar type methane.
So
Which,
in her defense, I will say she goes into that in later videos.
Oh,
I was
okay,
just
okay.
getting into that and kind of mode of communication and building trust that way more so than what she was talking about content wise. But
I think they're great. I think that's great. I mean, it's a little slower and lower level than something I would probably watch, but I think that, you know, maybe high school levels and things like that, or someone who is not quite as researched in, you know, after high school levels probably is really going to appreciate that and connect with it. I don't think you have to have like all of the conflicting information in the same thing. Like, it seems like she's just trying to establish some baseline of general information that we generally agree on, or at least something that she's trying to put out there, which is fine. I I think that I like the way it's put forward in a very passive way. It's not aggressive. It's not trying to scare you. And I think that's important. Just putting knowledge out there without trying to scare you about it, especially with climate stuff. It seems way more credible to me than something that's just like, we're all dying, we're gonna die soon. Do something, we're gonna die. Like, we don't even have control over a country like China. And so we can look at what we're doing, we can look at the earth in general, but trying to scare someone over something they don't have control over you're gonna lose people on that.
Okay. Go ahead, Steph, if you want to.
My first question is, what audience is that targeted to? What's the age range?
So she made that, that's one of the oldest ones, because that's a 2016 video. So I think she meant that as general public when she got started doing that years ago in conjunction with PBS. So it was meant to be general audience and sort of build baseline knowledge before you get into some of the more specific stuff in later videos.
For me, it was a little mind numbing in terms of the production values, and the pacing was just a little bit, it wasn't horrible. It just felt like it was for kids to me. And so if we're talking about speaking to adults, that to me didn't resonate with me personally at all. Now, I tend to be more attracted to maybe a little bit of a higher level intellectual discussion, and that is maybe geared towards a subset of the public that isn't me. So I'm just telling you my reaction to it. It wouldn't be something I'd want to sit through, because it was just, actually, if I did sit through it, I would probably put on the fast forward and watch it at double speed, and then maybe I could get through it. So that, and I don't really see who, are they trying to change minds with that? Because that to me is a preaching to the choir video. It's not going to reach anybody who has any sort of skepticism over the issue. So I don't know if it has any.
Again, I do have to say that's one video of a series. She does get into the arguments and skepticism and things like that. So she addresses the claim, for example, that we're just doing this for the money kind of thing. She does actually go and talk about that claim that's made too, and talk about why that's not accurate.
This isn't my issue. It's not a hot button issue for me either way. So I don't have, it's just, I have other things that are important issues to me, and this, I'm not trying to, if somebody feels this is a great issue and I don't want them to be upset with me for not being really focused on it, but I have just, it's not my calling, I guess is what I'll say. So I see the arguments on both sides with this issue too. So I understand why people are concerned about it, because they see it as a mechanism of control. Whether she says there's a financial interest or not, people are seeing it as a mechanism of control. And if they're concerned about it being a mechanism of control, starting off with these cutesy little pictures and, little cartoony people and going, oh, look, there's a blanket around the earth. And if we get too much stuff and make the blanket too thick, then we're all going to, that's not going to be appealing to people who are concerned about a totalitarian global government that won't let them drive their car wherever they want to go. So in terms of the actual effectiveness of that, I just don't see that I'm sure she's very well-meaning. I've seen worse videos. I just don't see that it's going to really change much. So that's my Stephanie review.
But I guess a better way to ask this would be not that specific video necessarily. I guess, would you all prefer to see more scientists get out there and actually, would that build some level of credibility and trust to have more scientists out there who are talking on YouTube, even if it's not that kind of like mind-numbing level, but actually talking to each other or talking thing, have it recorded and not be through the filter of like CNN, MSNBC, Fox, or any of the rest?
But the best example I can give you is Brett Weinstein and his wife, Heather Haying, I believe. I might not be pronouncing it correct. The Dark Horse podcast. is probably one of the best podcasts out there. And they are both scientists, and they're both very reasonable, and they're both willing to look at opposing viewpoints and other opinions, and they try to be objective, and they show integrity and principle, and they aren't partisan, so they can be appealing to people of both the liberal and conservative persuasion here in America. So I think they're probably one of the best examples of how scientists can actually speak to the public. They aren't watering things down. They aren't dumbing it down with these little cartoons and acting like we're 3 years old. They have very high level, intelligent conversations. They have long form conversations, and they also have clips that are taken out of the podcast so that you can just digest some smaller clips if you don't want to watch the whole show. So that would be my example of what I'd like to see. If scientists have those types of shows, I would be interested in those.
Okay. Deb, go for it.
Okay. During last year, one of my best sources of information about the research that was coming out about various treatments and understanding the coronavirus was the weekly or twice weekly YouTube channel MedCram, where the guy was a hospitalist. He actually was having rotations in COVID wards, but he was also, he would bring out whatever articles that had been published that week and break them down as to the size of groups. And he would get into the statistics of it, but he explained it in a way that made it easy, I think, for almost anyone to be able to understand. And he would draw little charts and things like that to convey information that was at a level that a layperson could understand.
Mm-hmm.
I
And
watched those.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody
I
else?
those, and there was Dr. John on
John Campbell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't watched much recently, but he just took a very measured approach and non-alarmist, which was great, and it seemed more impartial than most others, and I don't know, I liked it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is they say, here's the research. This is what the findings are. This is what I think it means in total around what I know is going on, but it's up to you to make your own decision. And yeah, both of them I found to be very, very even-handed in their presentations.
Anybody else want to add anything?
I was going to say the problem I have with what I saw of the video, just jumped in the beginning, but often videos like that remind me a little bit of CRT. You begin with a concept, you explain why we have a warmer Earth, and then all of a sudden you jump without any preamble into, oh, look what we do as humans, which kind of bypasses the eons of time that our Earth has been going through changes. We have had what is going up and down, and we have variations. So it's sort of like, yes, we know what causes it, and now we just jump to the conclusion that that must be it. And I think that's what I have. You oversimplify a problem. You oversimplify what it is. And we all know well enough that we have climate, microclimates, we have lots of different variations. So you cannot do that, and especially not on that scale. So anything that does that, you lose me right away.
Okay. So in a way, it was treating you as dumber than you really are, was the kind of sense.
Yeah, that's a good way to say
Okay,
it.
that's good to know. If Catherine sees this video, I'm sure that might be a surprise to her, because that series was acclaimed and pretty popular. So, Brooke, do you want to add anything, or just?
Well, I know that YouTube has so many different avenues that you can go and you can find what you're looking for. But in general, people's attention span is usually about 10 minutes or less. So if a video is going longer than that, it can be hard, especially if you can't watch it and fast forward, because some people are they have too many different sound effects or clips that they're playing, and it's weird and fast forward. But if it's just somebody talking and they're being reasonable, it's nice to have YouTubers that aren't necessarily putting on a production, and that was a little bit too much of a production for me.
Okay.
If it's not so much of a production, like, oh, I'm trying to get you interested, I like the enthusiastic YouTubers who will go on about a topic because they're interested in it and because they know what they're talking about, or they're just curious enough to do an experiment on camera, and then sometimes they learn something with you. So they're taking you along on a journey, and it's not so much just a teacher in front of a classroom.
Okay. So yeah, I appreciate that too. You want to add something, Jim?
Yeah, so there was a really good, and I think it was PBS. This was back just after 2009/11, 2001. They talked about, I think it was like 6 months after or something like that. Anyway, they talked about the global pan evaporation rate changing throughout the world on the days after 9/11, because see, all the planes were grounded at that time.
Yep.
And so the pan evaporation rate went up, which the pan evaporation rate, it's a really simple thing. It's a pan with water in it that they fill every day at the same time to a certain level. And then at the same time, the next day, they measure how much is gone, and they know how much energy has hit that and caused the water to evaporate. I mean, it's
how they measure evaporation.
Yeah. But it's also how they measure how much energy has hit the earth at those various points. And they've been having these things for a really long time. They've been doing these measurements anyway. And so when the planes were all grounded during that time, it was sort of a natural experiment. The pan evaporation rate went up. In other words, more stuff was hitting the earth, more energy was hitting the earth. But once the planes resumed again, the contrails had a shielding effect, and the pan evaporation rate was lower in general. Anyway, to me, that said, okay, we now have a natural experiment. That had more of an impact on me than all the estimates and, oh, we go out 100 years and this is what happens. I mean, a tiny change in the beginning is going to give you a huge difference at the end. And anyway,
Okay.
projections. So that's just my 2
And
cents.
I love the cat in the background, by the way. But okay, so I want to play Noodle. Okay. Brooke, did you want to add something? It sounded okay.
My shoulder hurts.
Sorry. So there's a couple more clips I wanted to play. The next one is Dr. Anthony Fauci and his appearance on MSNBC with Chuck Todd on June 9th of 2021. So I'm going to let that run. It's about 5 minutes, and we will let you all respond after the fact to this commentary.
And Chuck, if you go through each and every one of the points, which are so ridiculous as just painfully ridiculous, but nonetheless, if you go through each and every one of them, you can explain and debunk it immediately. I mean, every single one. He should be fired because he, in the beginning, changed his mind about masks. Well, okay, so let's go back early on with the masks, and let's take a look at that. At the time that we were saying we shouldn't be wearing a mask, there were 3 factors that were going on. A, there was thought to be a shortage of masks. B, there was no evidence that masks worked outside of the context of a hospital. I wear a mask when I'm seeing patients with respiratory disease that could be transmissible, like tuberculosis, a well-fitted N95. Thirdly, we were not aware of the extent of asymptomatic spread. So we said you don't really need to wear a mask. It wasn't only me. I'm picked out as the villain. It was the Surgeon General of the United States, and the entire CDC was saying the same thing. So as we went from January, February, March, April, it became clear that those 3 things, A, there was no shortage and you could wear a cloth mask. B, the data showed that, in fact, outside of the hospital setting, masks do work. And third, to our painful awareness, we became clear that 50% or more of the transmissions were with people who had no symptoms. So that's when we said, we've got to get people to wear masks. That's what's called, Chuck, the scientific process. You make a recommendation, an opinion, and a guideline based on what you know at a given time. As a scientist, as a health official, when those data change, when you get more information, it's essential that you change your position because you've got to be guided by the science and the current data. That issue with masks is people want to fire me or put me in jail for what I've done, namely follow the science. I could go the next half an hour going through each and every point that they make. It's preposterous, Chuck. Totally preposterous.
Well, and look, I want to end with this. This is an email you sent on February 27th. You happen to send it to Morgan Fairchild. And I just want to end with it because it only underscores the fact that you've been extraordinarily consistent. And I'll just read the last part here. The American public should be prepared to mitigate an outbreak in this country by measures that include social distancing, teleworking, temporary closures of schools, et cetera. You wrote this on February 27th. It says, I believe we were still a month away from 15 days to slow the spread, all of those things. So there was a ton of consistency throughout these emails. So we've struggled to understand why there's controversy around it. But I want to end with this question. You are now getting attacked. As you know, many state public health officials have quit their jobs over the last year because of the unrelenting attacks that have taken place. And now you're at the focal point. What is your level of concern that we're going to discredit public health officials to the point of, look at Russia. They actually have a good vaccine, and none of their citizens will take it because they don't trust their own government.
Right. It's very dangerous, Chuck, because a lot of what you're seeing as attacks on me, quite frankly, are attacks on science. Because all of the things that I have spoken about consistently from the very beginning have been fundamentally based on science. Sometimes those things were inconvenient truths for people, and there was pushback against me. So if you are trying to, get at me as a public health official and a scientist, you're really attacking not only Dr. Anthony Fauci, you're attacking science. And anybody that looks at what's going on clearly sees that. You have to be asleep not to see that. That is what's going on. Science and the truth are being attacked.
Okay. I wanted to play in fairness to Dr. Fauci, because I know the last part of that has been clipped out and played all over the internet. I wanted to give it a chance to have the whole commentary of what was in that interview leading up to that point. So what do y'all think of?
Can I start? Oh my God. And here's the thing. I'm actually not one of these anti-mask people. This is another issue I'm neutral on. I go out on a mask. I personally don't, it doesn't bother me. I understand why people get upset about it, and I understand why people want to wear them. So I am not an anti-mask advocate. It's not my, whatever. But that whole escalation that he did, where he went from this like aggrieved person to attacks on me or attacks on science, that is just wrong. He is making everything worse. And this is exactly the example that I was talking about right at the beginning when I said we have people who get all the credentials and they're really good at mustering up their little minions and climbing up the ladder to put themselves in positions of power. But that's not good leadership, what he just did. He's pushing partisan division. He is now saying that if you criticize him, that you're criticizing science, which is a big load of BS. He is not taking the concerns of Americans who are concerned about masks seriously. So he's now just, putting this out as an attack on him rather than responding to the concerns that people have. I mean, there's just so many things wrong with it. And this is precisely why we have so many problems in this country. It's people like him that are put into these positions or put themselves into positions of power who aren't responding a way to heal the division of the country. He's just inflaming them. And are some of the Republican politicians politicizing this for their own personal gain? Probably too. but he is supposed to be, he's not an elected politician. He's supposed to be a medical professional here to help with public health policy. And as such, he should not be getting involved in this partisan stuff at all. What he should be saying, if he's going to be a strong leader, is say, you know what? I don't want to get into these partisan politics. I do want to respond to the concerns of the average American who might not like wearing masks. Maybe there are some of you where you feel suffocated or you don't feel comfortable or you have asthma. And I want to address those concerns. And I want you to know that we're hearing you. Was he doing that? No, he wasn't. He was just going on and on about how if you attack him, you're attacking science. And it was painfully ridiculous. I don't know if you saw the typo in the Chiron. They fixed it halfway through, but I mean, it was just, that is just part of the problem. It's just really horrible. Anyway, I'll shut up now. Thank you.
No, I figured that was going to get some commentary. Who wants to go next? Patrice?
Yeah. I agree with what Stephanie said for sure. I think what we're seeing is Fauci's own desperation. He does not want to be put in jail or have horrible consequences come down on him for this. Understandably so, right? He's just one man. I mean, I know he's in charge of a lot of stuff, but there are a lot of people involved in all these decisions. It shouldn't come down, I think, on him. But I'm seeing like a lot of damage control, right? So a lot of things happen that were conflicting. I don't think that that's crazy to say. Like we do have good studies to show N95s are effective in whatever certain situations. I didn't see personally anything that I found extremely credible on other masks. And so I'm in the house of, I don't trust all that. I'm not really mask or anti-mask as far as whether they work or not. I personally hate them because of what they do to you psychologically, or me at least. So that's my experience. I wear them if I need to. I don't if I don't, whatever.
Yeah. To you guys though, I saw a lot of nodding heads when Stephanie was saying this, so maybe can synthesize it a little bit. I guess there was a lot there that he said that basically would have shattered a lot of the trust that you would have had in him or in the public health officials that he represents. The scientists in I think he's NIAID is where he's at, or he's in one of the health agencies. I forget which one. I can't even remember which one he's the director of. It's just terrible.
Well, we should be able to criticize.
NIAID.
Oh, I was right.
He said, don't criticize the science. That's a big red flag.
Right. Well,
Man,
and you should
always criticize the science. Mm-hmm. Always. Yeah.
But two things. One, that was after my lunch. How could you do that? And two, they never have any receipts. There's never, I should be able to go to the website and they say, here's our current decision and here's the studies, here's our reasoning behind it. Never happened. They've lost me in all credibility on that.
I think that's my biggest problem too. Exactly that. There's decades of studies that said masks, and especially cloth masks, are not working. Because they have specific surgical masks. He's right. The mask that he's used to wearing, the 95, is to protect him, not to protect the patient who is already sick. The studies and then even the data that has come out since then has been looking multiple times to where people, when the countries asked for mask mandates and how that impacted the case rate, and it did go up, whether they had a mask or not. Often it went mandate first, cases go up. So whatever you want to make of it, but they never ever, they tell you you're dumb, you're stupid, but they don't give you a study. They don't feel the need to say, okay, we have like 4 decades, 5 decades. The WHO had that information on their website until very recently or in the beginning. Masks don't work. You have to keep your social distance. That's the only thing we can do right now. And all of a sudden, everybody changes without pointing to any study that actually proves that.
Deb, did you want to add something?
Yeah, one quick thing is about 2 months before all this started, there's a guy on YouTube I follow, is a South African that was living in China. And he made the point, he says, we're having this epidemic over here, and I looked and you can't buy a N95 masks. So I go on Amazon and I try and find them, and they're all out. This is 2 months before. So for someone to say we didn't know, he knew. I mean, he was in China, but someone knew, and just ignored it. So anyway.
One thing that struck me is that Fauci is not good at taking responsibility. Yeah, you noticed he pointed to that. Okay, CDC said it's, yeah, WHO said it. He's saying everybody else was saying the same thing I was saying, as opposed to admitting, well, we were wrong and everyone else was following us, or we were following CDC or whatever. He is not good at taking responsibility. And I think that's one of the things that makes it difficult to believe all the time.
Interesting. Yeah. There's a few different clips like that. I mean, I could play one more that I have of Fauci, or at least a little bit of it. If you're game and you have a little bit of time, that we could do that. But I'd also like to get into, knowing some of you probably need to leave in the next like 15 minutes or so. I wanted to get into some of the things we've kind of hit on it a little bit, like, well, there's no accountability here. There's no credibility. They look down on us, all these kinds of different things. So in the hope of leaving this on a positive note and not just saying all the scientists are terrible, we don't trust them, what would you like to see us do? And I think of this in particular because the Biden administration did put out a request for information through the Office of Science and Technology Policy on what kinds of things can we do to improve integrity, scientific integrity policies, but also what kinds of things can we do to improve the trust in federal scientists and federal agencies doing science. And so that's where I'd like to end it right now, is to get into some of that discussion of what kind of things would you want to see from scientists, from universities, that would improve your ability to trust in them or improve their credibility with the public. What kinds of things would you like to see? And again, that's another brain tickler to end it with, but
yes, from my point of view, is some humility and admit when they made mistakes, like to say, well, no masks, and then one mask, and then two masks. I mean, that, which is it? I don't, now it's back to one, or I don't know. Just, but there are plenty of other places in science where, especially like diet, where it's just like all influenced by one guy years ago. Anyway, that it just, we have to get off this censorship train and allow more voices and admit where the complications are and so forth.
I would like to just see more transparency with the methods used to come to whatever conclusions. I want to be able to follow where you have as much as I can, to see where you are. That gives me confidence, that gives me respect, and it also gives me tools to fight back against disinformation, like actual disinformation,
Okay. Steph, you want to chime in? You turned your camera on.
Yes. So there really needs to be like a complete restructuring of our institutions from the ground up. And part of that would have to include creating a new vision of what the improved institution would look like. Now, I'm not calling for a revolution, nor am I calling throwing the baby out with the bathwater. However, I'm going to try to be nice. That display from Fauci in that video is exactly what's wrong with our institutions. Somebody like that is not a good leader that we need right now in this particularly partisan divided environment. He's just fanning the flames and making it worse. And the reason that he's there is probably because he's very ambitious and good at climbing ladders and not necessarily so great at the things that he really should be good at. So how do we promote people that aren't ambitious? Because it's often the ambitious people that we need to be the most worried about, right? There's that book, I haven't read it in a while, The Sociopath Next Door, 1 in 25 people are sociopaths. I'm not saying anyone specifically is, but those 1 in 25 are the ones who often end up running things. So we might want to look at having some sort of, first of all, there's a Hippocratic oath that's in medicine that's often ignored, but having some sort of Hippocratic oath for science might be good. And as part of that, there should be a clause in there about having disagreement be part of the process and allowing dissenting voices and not allowing a mindless dogma that becomes a tyrannical dogma. And if somebody says something like, if you're disagreeing with me, you're disagreeing with science, that we laugh them out of the room and don't give them the keys to the country, because that person has an authoritarian streak that is very frightening, frankly. So this would require some thinkers to come up with what these possible ethical codes, new ethical codes might be. Maybe creating some structures where we actually would have average people working with scientists on policies, changing the way we promote people, particularly within our governments, because the government is a big part of this problem. And then also looking at the influence of money on science and seeing if we can change that. So it's no easy matter, and it probably won't get fixed, but that's probably where I would start.
Okay. And I'm going to ask everybody to give their thoughts on kinds of things you would like to see done. So no, this is what I'm going to ask everybody to answer. So whomever wants to try next to say, what do you think should be done to try and improve the trust in scientists in the U.S.? Or better yet, if you really don't trust a whole lot of scientists right now, and particularly the ones in the Fed, what could they do that would improve the amount of trust that you have? It's the same brain tickler. I just rephrased it. That's all.
I would.
I was trying to let Brooke go first. Brooke, you go first.
Well, I'm always suspicious of people who want to be in front of camera and want to be a celebrity. And that's my biggest problem with Fauci, is he wants to be popular. I mean, the fact that he wanted to be on the cover of a magazine that's just proof that he's in it for the celebrity status. He wants everybody to know his name, and he doesn't care if he's popular for the right reasons. So his motivation is what I question. But when it comes to any scientists, I feel like the ones that I can trust are the ones that I can actually talk to more directly, just because they're more human. And when you get somebody that when it just becomes this whole popularity contest and this whole in it for the money, it becomes this big mess, and we're in a big mess, and I don't know how to untangle it. I really don't.
I had something else. I think, getting some people we don't really know, who are just regular people, in with scientists to have maybe a long form discussion, maybe a big round table, whatever. That could be good. It could possibly, poke holes in things, and I don't just bring up what lots of people may be thinking that they don't have a chance to say.
So let me follow on from that real quick. Would it be, because I do know Texas Tech actually hosted pre-pandemic, hosted a regular series called Science by the Glass, where a whole bunch of people would just gather in a bar and drink and talk over science.
Ah,
Would
that
that
sounds
be
fun.
Okay? Better remember that. Deb, Marcella, any thoughts you want to add? Jim disappeared somewhere.
Yeah. Go ahead, Deb.
I agree with Patrice that getting more lay people involved with, scientists, whether it's meeting together, just to exchange ideas and things like that. Or also in a short term, when, say, the government is presenting scientific information, they tend to water it down to the point where it's not very useful, at least from my perspective. So if they had a way to give us paths to find out, to find out where they are drawing their information, what are the studies? Let us at least drill down to see if we can understand it ourselves, rather than just getting their bullet points.
Right.
Which is probably what Fauci just gets, is a bunch of bullet points.
Yeah, and I'm curious, that's a good point to make, is like, stop watering it down and point us to the studies and things like that. And I mean, if it's funded by a taxpayer funded grant, wherever the study is done, it by law must appear publicly, and so much the data must also be provided publicly somewhere. It's usually buried pretty well, but it is publicly accessible on the web. But so you would have it be more accessible.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's a transparency thing. That's an openness thing. Keep going. We can keep going as long as like.
Yeah. I'd like instead of if we're going to have, public funding of some of these things, I'd rather there be I'd rather the quality of the research be the criteria as opposed to the outcome. And maybe you have to have, who's on the other side of your research who thinks it's wrong. It's going to make, it's going to do a quality job at trying to demonstrate you're incorrect or some of the holes or issues or something. That's the only way we're going to move forward is, you got to have that tension between things like that.
What if we saw some scientists debate each other who are on the different sides of things? Don't really see that too much. And respectful, but I think that a lot of times the scientists are going to be more respectful by default than someone who's just a public figure trying to get clicks or whatever.
Yeah. So so not a Senate hearing where you have, two different scientists brought in by two different sides.
You have crazy boards, whatever propaganda put up.
Yeah, let's not do that.
and long format, so it's not like the 6-minute clip. That's not, that doesn't work.
Go ahead, Steph. You wanted to chime in something.
Yes, not to be overly negative because we want to wrap up on a positive note, but I do want to point out that science needs to learn that it's not all powerful and without fault. The pandemic, if what we have learned is possibly true, that gain of function research might be responsible for the SARS-CoV-2 virus, has been caused by science. Okay, a lot of our problems, and if you think climate change is an issue, guess what? That is caused by science and technology. It's not caused by, people who are living in harmony with nature. It's caused by this very behemoth science, technology, corporate, whatever you want to call it, that now claiming that it is the sole arbiter of truth and has all the answers for us. So why, on a big picture level, are we trusting that only science can save us when it's science that got us into this big mess in the first place? And I think that's really something that scientists need to step back and really think about, because in many ways, science has caused more problems than it has solved. Now, once again, I'm not anti-science. I love the fact that I can talk to you all through video conferencing, because we didn't have that when I was a kid. We just had a telephone that was attached to the wall the whole time. So I don't want to give up all my science and technology, but this idea that science knows all and that it can't be questioned is just simply wrong. So scientists need to kind of like get a grip on themselves and get that ego out of the way, because that ego is very destructive. And when that scientific ego gets control, we see what we just saw with Fauci on the television there, and worse, right? So that to me is the biggest problem in science right now.
Yeah, maybe we
Okay.
need more avenues for scientists to be successful without being right.
Mhm. Also, I think in terms
me-
of transparency, another thing could be is we fund as taxpayers a lot of research that's not being done in the US. It's being done like in China or Israel, and we don't really have any knowledge until something like this happens that our taxpayer dollars are going to those sorts of things.
Okay.
So again, it's a transparency issue.
Well, I think Marcella, you're the last
Oh.
one here.
Yeah, I had a couple of thoughts. I think for me, one of them is that if something new and novel pops up, like with the coronavirus, let's go to COVID first. If it's truly the pandemic, then you're not going to focus on just one thing. And for me, from the beginning, it was like, okay, why are we doing all novel things and throwing out all what we have learned in the past as first thing because it's a novel virus? So the PCR test is one of those examples, but also the inability to look at anything else but a vaccine as the final solution. So that to me is where, there is a lot of connection to, where is the money, who gets the money, and where is the money for research put. I'm sure we could have funded other studies that would have had short-term benefits or preventative benefits, and people would not have died either. So that, to me, going to that seems always like some of the science we have learned is not good, but we have built policies and bureaucracies around that science, and that's never going to go away, because some people's job all is doing is checking on food labels to see that the salt content and the sugar content and the carb content and whatever content we come up with is on there. That's their job. So why would they give up their job? I think if science could divorce more from government, and we would have, I think, more transparency. There would be more room for debate on, is the answer A or B, or what are we really finding? And again, not jump to a conclusion. So we found this, so that must be true, right? There is the correlation, causation. I think that argument goes lost a lot. So I think divorcing it from policy in a lot of cases, divorcing it from government, because I think a lot of the good ideas would bubble up from bottom up, because people, if they could learn what it is, do more. And I think, America has the war on a lot of things, and they never seem to go the right direction. So whether it's the war on obesity or poverty or drugs, I think we have a problem there. So clearly that marriage between science and government is not always good, or almost never good to me.
Interesting.
Yeah, you can't have science usurp personal responsibility and your self-education and making good political judgments, policy judgments and things. You can't have science just come in automatically, just cut that off or get in the way.
Okay, then. Those were the main questions that I wanted to ask. If there was anybody who wanted to leave some closing thoughts and remarks, and I'll turn off the recording in a second here, but is any closing thoughts? This is really fascinating to listen to all of you. I was trying to stay out of it as much as I could and just listen to what you all were saying. So I appreciate it. It's been fun for me to hear some of these things. But yeah, any closing thoughts, commentary?
When I was growing up, I think it was in The Making of the Atomic Bomb, though it may not have been in that book, but it was related to that. And there was in the scientific community at the time, there was a big worry about the government getting into funding science, not so much the atomic bomb specifically, but huge amounts of money were being poured in, and it was like, there goes. And their statement was, which I didn't understand at the time, there goes our freedom to do research. I mean, our freedom to choose what we want to research on, or anyway. So that now government will dictate it. And I think that now, looking on since I was born pre-1960, it's been a long time since I read that. So anyway.
Awesome. Anybody else want to add a closing remark?
Yeah. I think on a positive note, I do like the new technology which would allow scientists to share their work. I mean, whether it's through TED Talks or their own channel or however it is, to actually explain and how things work. I mean, I love these shows where they say modern marvels and how that works, or how is this, how did it come about? And I find that really fascinating. And I think the technology to do that on the cheap gives scientists a lot of opportunity to actually share what they've been doing in a dark lab somewhere.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. It's wonderful to watch science. Yeah, Steph?
I think one of the biggest dangers we have right now is that science is in danger of becoming a religion. And it's not becoming a liberal, open-minded religion. It's becoming a fundamentalist religion. And fundamentalist, I mean, there's a certain set dogma. You have to agree with the dogma. If you don't agree with the dogma, you're excommunicated and you're thrown out of the community. And that's not what science really is about. So this new scientism isn't actually scientific, because it's so focused on creating a conformity of thought and thinking and speaking that does not allow for the free flow of information, exploration, or the challenge of existing dogmas. And if we didn't have the challenging of existing dogmas, we wouldn't have modern science. Galileo was challenging existing dogma. Newton, when he talked about gravity, he was challenging existing dogma. And then when we had the quantum physics revolution in the early the 1900s, that was completely flipped our worldview upside down. The only way that we can have advances in science is by completely rethinking everything that we know and being open to something that sounds really wild and crazy. And unfortunately, that's not what we're having right now. We're having this weird reaction against any sort of disagreement. And it's like people are kind of corralling the horses and saying, no, this is the only way that you can believe about certain thing. And a lot of it's political, a lot of it being framed as only this side believes in science and this other side doesn't believe in science. So people are kind of reflexively taking one side or the other. And that's really not healthy on either side, actually. If we're only being reactive, then we're really not thinking. We're just reacting with our lizard brains, right? So I think that is science to not become a bad religion. If it does become a religion, make it a good one. One where it really uplifts people and it allows people to think differently and to explore differently and to be kind. Because that kindness isn't there. When Fauci says, if you criticize me, you criticize science, that's not kindness. That's the opposite of kindness. When people's concerns are dismissed or they're told that they're stupid, whether overtly or covertly, that's not kindness. And science without kindness becomes like the science that the Nazis had. That's what it becomes. And so it's a very dangerous path that we're on. And I hope that it can turn around and that we can bring a true heart into science. And when I say true heart, I mean a genuine heart, not a virtue signaling heart where we're saying, oh, we're superior because we've done this and you don't believe in this and we're better than you. That isn't a true heart. A true heart allows for people to have a different opinion and you still love them anyway. And we haven't learned that lesson in America. If somebody has a different opinion, we hate them for it. And that's wrong. You shouldn't do somebody down to their opinion, because people's opinions change and people change over time. So if you hate somebody because they don't have the opinion that you have, you're hating a mirage. You're just hating that person's state at a particular time. So it's really not a good reason to dehumanize anybody, but there really isn't ever a good reason to dehumanize anybody. And so science needs to learn that. And I hope that they can before it's too late, because otherwise the science may kill us all, really, honestly. So anyway,
Yeah.
I'm done thinking.
I agree wholeheartedly with Stephanie. I think that we're seeing it in schools and so forth, where we're teaching something that's supposedly a theory, but it's not falsifiable. So it isn't a theory, it's an ideology. And it's not helping anybody. I mean, it's divisive. And, you know, if you want to go to war with another group, you first have to dehumanize them. And certainly, for example, the Nazis did that, you know, by their science of their superior. And then, you know, we have to get rid of vermin. So they did that in all the shops with Cyclone B. And then, of course, they classified some people we consider human as vermin. And that did not end up well. And that's not, you know, we don't want to start wearing yellow badges on clothing.
That we don't. I think it was I think this is a good place, unless there's anything anybody else wants to add in closing. But I think of Albert Einstein's quote that science without religion is blind, and religion without science is lame. They complement each other so well, and not having a moral. So I've said this many times on my channel, and it's very true that the science doesn't give you a moral compass for anything, because it's just about a process to find the answers to questions. And so moral compass has to come from somewhere else. Yeah. Patrice?
I know we've been very critical of science right now. I'm so happy about that. And also I want to say thanks to the scientists. Like, you dedicate your life to study and learning, and hopefully that's for, you know, improve you want to help improve humanity. And so I do appreciate that. I'm not like writing that off at all. And I think that if scientists can remember that everyone matters as much, and all the opinions can be useful, that'll be really good.
Here's a fun question we could end on. What was your favorite thing created by science? What's your favorite thing that's been created by science that you use?
My scooter.
A scooter.
Yes. Most fun.
Ice cream.
Ice cream, yes.
Ice cream. Thank you.
Thank you, science, for ice cream.
There's a whole James Burke Connections gets all into how that Napoleon had a whole problem with feeding his troops, and so they came up with canning. It was in a bottle, but anyway, and that eventually led to making this guy could make ice cream basically in the summer in Florida. And anyway, it basically leads to Saturn V rocket. It's an interesting kind of thing back in the 70s. Anyway, James Burke Connections. He has some, I like his stuff, but anyway. So
it's the simple things.
Yeah, I guess I'd probably say computers just because that's my job now. So without it, I'd be doing something else.
You love them and you hate them.
I'm going to say the internet, but I'm also going to add on to that because internet's now being really clamped down on, and I think the censorship could get a lot worse before it gets better. Whatever comes after the internet, that people have learned to get around the censorship.
That's a good way to think of it. Deb, Brooke, do you want to add anything onto this?
I have a real easy one. Glasses.
Yes.
Without glasses, yes. I probably would have been dead before I was 6 years old.
I would have been blind
most of my life, so I appreciate glasses.
I literally would have been.
That's very true. I forgot blind. I have LASIK, so that's probably the best thing that ever happened to me.
I was also going to say the internet because that's the reason I met my husband, and the reason that we're here on this. So.
Exactly. We'll end on a happy note. We say good things about science, even though we're really, really critical too at the same time. So I just want to say thank you all for coming. Don't jump right off after I stop the recording, because little notes of debrief, but thank you all for coming. Thank you all out there on YouTube for watching. We appreciate it. Until next time, I say to you all, I'm Adrienne, your lovely host of ScioSophia, and I will see you all next time. Until next time, we hope you stay curious.